Hi and welcome to another episode of our series Research in Profile, brought to you by the School of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Queensland. My name is Sebastian Kaempf, and I'm joined here by my colleague, Dr. Lee Wilson, who is currently a postdoc within our school. Lee just published his latest book. It's fresh off the press with an intriguing title called Martial Arts and the Body Politic in Indonesia. Lee, welcome. Nice to have you here.
It's nice to be here.
Yeah. So let me kick this off. I mean, I find the title quite intriguing, Martial Arts and the Body Politic in Indonesia.
Yeah.
What got you interested in that topic?
Well, good question. Initially, I've had a long fascination with the practice of martial arts. Practically, since I was a kid.
You were practicing as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is kind of one of those situations where I've managed to turn a hobby into a career, as it were, or at least a kind of a research stream that forms part of my career. But one of the things that really interested me as well was not just the physical practice of the art, but the ways in which an art is shaped by the culture in which it developed. Knowledge transmission and the ways in which skills are acquired are very specific in different arts, and you can see that the ways in which they developed are very much a product of a particular culture, and so you can't really understand an art unless you understand the culture in which it's a part of. So that led me into a kind of more academic engagement with the study of martial arts, and the interest kind of developed from there.
Plus, you were living in Indonesia for a few years.
Well,
and that
yeah, but
must have triggered that as well.
Yeah, well, the original interest in martial arts led to eventually practicing an art called pencak silat, which is an Indonesian martial art, which led to the interest in Indonesia, wanting to know more about the culture in which this art developed, and the ways in which it's practiced in different ways around the world. So, looking at martial arts in the diaspora as well. I first learned pencak silat in London. Was taught by a Ghanaian, a guy called Richard de Boords, who was taught by an Indonesian guy called Adito Anafi, who lived in exile in Paris. His father was ambassador to Cuba and had to leave Indonesia in 1966 after the communist pogrom there. And so this is one of the things that piqued my interest, was how an art can be kind of transferred from place to place, from people from very different backgrounds, which led eventually to going to Indonesia as an undergraduate at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, where I spent a couple of months in West Sumatra looking at the practice and pedagogy of martial arts. And it's eventually developed into a broader project, which formed the basis of a doctoral dissertation and led eventually to the development and writing of this book.
Yeah, cool. So within the book, what are the conceptual and empirical puzzles that drive the inquiry?
Well, the first, I guess, the primary goal of the book was a desire to know why it is that this martial art, pencak silat, has figured so prominently in Indonesian society and politics. I wanted to know what kind of social and cultural milieu informed the practice of the art, and why it's been such an integral part of so many different aspects of Indonesian political history. So there was a desire to know more about the way in which the art developed in this way. The book is also an engagement with conceptions of power in Indonesia, kind of classic models of power that have been critiqued but never really fully engaged with. Work by Benedict Anderson and Clifford Geertz on conceptions of power. And one of the things that struck me as being most significant was that the body was missing from these accounts of power. And the body and the ways in which it's configured in forms of knowledge. I kind of approached the study of pencak silat as a form of knowledge. Ways in which the body is just transformed through the practice of these arts. One of the things that the book does is consider pencak silat as an object of ways it's constituted as an object of national culture, but also looks at it as looks at the techniques of physical and spiritual warfare that are associated with the art, and the importance of these, and the ways in which the body is used as a means of articulating claims to authority and the ways in which power is contested through these techniques that constitute this corpus of knowledge, these techniques of physical and spiritual warfare. So it was a way of unpicking an awful lot that had been written about power and politics in Indonesia that was missing a significant aspect, which was the body. The book also engages with violence as well. Obviously, violence is, as a social relation, very much a part of the practice of martial arts. But the ways in which violence has been written about in Indonesia, I felt, didn't really give a satisfactory explanation of the cultural sanctioning of violence. And so, engaging with violence through the practice of martial arts gave me a way to begin to think about some of the cultural logics that inform violence and these techniques of physical and spiritual warfare. So,
I mean, that's in a very conceptual manner. Can you maybe give us an illustration or an example?
Oh, practically, absolutely.
Of how this manifests itself practically in Indonesian political life?
One of the things that I focus on is the practice of invulnerability, something you find throughout Southeast Asia.
Of invulnerability?
Invulnerability, yeah. And vulnerability is an important part of it. I mean, everybody that's invulnerable in these practices does have some kind of vulnerability. And this is, I think, it kind of points to an understanding of power as being precarious and mutable and ultimately can be undone unless you can continuously perform and enact power through these practices of invulnerability. And so throughout kind of Indonesian political history, you find a figure who is on the cover of the book. One of like the figure on the cover of the book, a guy called Emma Bratakusuma, guys that are adepts in martial arts, but which also form points of charismatic authority. They're figures which are sort of obviously able to protect themselves and others around them. And so one of the arguments that the book makes, drawing on work from Tony Day, is that these guys were able to afford protection to those around them, and often, because of that, figured very prominently in resistance to the colonial authorities. These figures, the Jago or Jawara, the word means champion, figured very prominently in the struggle for independence against the Dutch, were co-opted into the military. So this idea of the Jago, the champion, somebody that's able to draw on spiritual technologies of power which perhaps make them invulnerable are very important figures. And so very practically within Indonesian political society, you'll find these guys at street level. Now, existing in pretty much every city throughout Indonesia, you'll find somebody in some way that can make some claim to invulnerability and is seen to be a kind of authority figure. And one of the arguments that the book makes is that these, as a kind of cultural logic, as an understanding of power, you can find this at different levels of political scale. And even the ways in which ideologically Suharto's New Order portrayed itself, you can see that there was some credence given to this understanding of power, that the importance of spiritual authority and maintaining relations with some, of having spiritual knowledge, but also maintaining relations with the ancestors is incredibly important to these practices of invulnerability. And you find this in different ways, articulated in different ways, in village society, and one of the claims that the book makes is in nationalist representations of the state under the New Order.
Okay, fascinating. So for the viewer here, who we strongly encourage, of course, to read the book and have a look, but give us an understanding also of what the core empirical and conceptual findings of your book are.
Okay, so as I said, the book engages with these classic models of power and makes the argument that whereas power, or understandings of power have been portrayed in these very seminal accounts as being something substantive, that there is something, there's other aspects of power that have to be taken into consideration in the ways in which it's conceptualized and understood in these practices, both martial arts and more broadly within cultural logics that circulate within Indonesia. And it looks at these relationally and says, it sort of draws these out, saying, so it's a re-engagement with these classic models in a way that attempts to make them more less exotic. They've been exoticized, and Indonesia's been portrayed as being, or at least these models of power have been portrayed as being different and perhaps in a kind of Weberian sense as pre-modern. And the book argues that these kind of secular understandings of modernity are very limited in the ways in which you can begin to get a handle on what's going on with regard to these cultural logics of power in Indonesia. So it's not just an attempt to put the body back into politics, it's also an attempt to make an argument for an understanding of modernity that doesn't reduce everything to a kind of rationalist transformation of existent spiritual practices. It's saying they're still there, they still exist, you have to take these into account.
Fascinating. So by putting the body back into politics, what implications does this have for the way in which we think about and theorize about politics?
Well, firstly, I mean, the importance of the body in any kind of political analysis. Methodologically, this obviously has implications for the ways in which you begin to approach the study of politics and power. I mean, I'm an ethnographer by training, and there's no way in which you could begin to, I think, get some clear understanding, or at least I think I have some clear understanding of what's going on, without long-term association with these kinds of practices. I mean, the book draws on a number of different methods. I mean, it's participant observation, institutional ethnography, archival research, historical research. So methodologically, there's a need for a corpus of techniques, a suite of methodologies, in order to be able to properly understand the importance of practices like Pencak Silat. With regard to violence, I mentioned violence earlier on, and the ways in which violence, for example, mob violence in Indonesia and conceptions of social order that I think are associated with mob violence. You can't begin to understand that unless you can begin to conceptualize social order in relation to indigenous conceptions of power. So, and the ways in which the body is seen to be invulnerable and can be destroyed is also something quite fundamental to the ways that power has been demonstrated, both by the state and at local level in Indonesia. So, you know, putting the body back in IR recently, there's been this move towards practice, and I kind of, to some extent, find that it's difficult to understand, because I couldn't understand politics without the body, as it were. Methodologically, as I said, it does entail a commitment with regard to participant observation, sometimes quite a painful commitment to practice, that brings you to an understanding of an art in a way that's very difficult to get from the outside. But yeah, and looking more closely at the importance of violence to the constitution of power and sovereign authority in relation to these technologies of physical and spiritual warfare. At times entails an engagement with social relations that it's not that comfortable an endeavor. Violence is a difficult thing to begin to study. but it's something that we have to study, and in order to understand it, we have to engage with it. And so the book is an attempt to come to terms with that, in a sense, as well, you know?
Yeah.
No,
that's fascinating. It's a fascinating book. I loved reading it. Putting the body back into politics. So I can strongly encourage our viewers to get hold of the book, buy it for that special someone, and if you want to follow more about Lee Wilson's work or about what we do in the School of Political Science and International Studies, please follow us on our website or on the links that you will find below this video. Lee, thank you very much for coming over and giving us such great insights into your book.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.